Vanakkam. Welcome to this course on Classics in Neuroscience. In this series of videos, we have been looking at neural circuits, specifically on cortical columns and cortical processing. Previously, we were looking at visual processing and feature detectors. Last we looked at the work of Jerry Letwin on bug detectors or feature detectors. In this video, we will look at how intracellular or single unit recordings or intracellular recordings from the brain were first made in the 1950s. Specifically, we will focus on the work by Richard Jung in Germany and Denis Alph-Fassard in France. Remember, Jack Eccles' work on intracellular recordings were from the spinal cord, and we have seen and mentioned many times that these kind of recordings in the brain are not possible because of many reasons. One of the reasons being the pulsative activity of the heart and the vascular system, and the breathing system, pulsative activity. The other is the smaller size of the neurons and the circuitry, leading to very specific challenges in making these kind of intracellular recordings or even single unit recordings very challenging to perform these kind of studies. But still, people all around the world were making attempts to do these kind of studies or trying to replicate or trying to improve or extend the kind of work done by Jack Eccles in spinal cord to the brain. One of the scientists who pursued this line of work in Germany was Richard Jung. So, Richard Jung received medical training in Germany, and after his medical training, he was inspired by the discovery of Hans Berger, which is on EEG, and he pursued research in the field of EEG, and he was one of the first to record theta rhythms in response to sensory stimulation in EEG. I think this was in 1937 or so. After the war, Richard Jung was instrumental in reviving the scientific field, specifically the study of neurophysiology and neuroscience in Germany. So, he set up the research unit in Freiburg after the war, and in 1952 he reported the first single unit recordings from the visual cortex of cat in response to light stimuli. He was also interested in other things like trying to connect neurophysiology and behavior. For example, neural basis of epilepsy, sleep wake cycle, attention, perception. He also proposed the searchlight model as a neural basis for attention that was later pursued by people like Francis Crick and others. Another scientist also from Europe is Denis Alph-Fassard. She was born in 1916 in Paris, and she was advised to not pursue medicine as a career. So, she studied physics, but there was very little job opportunities for physicists in especially women physicists at that time. So, she turned her attention to other things like biology and became a technical assistant in Daniel Auger's lab. She was inspired by the work pursued by Fassard on EEG, and she started collaborating with Fassard and started recording action potentials after the war, consumables or research supplies were extraordinarily difficult to obtain and procure. Went through a lot of difficult times, but she did establish connections with English scientists who are working in similar fields, neurophysiologists who are working in similar fields. And one of the challenges that she faced as a scientist was her publications were all in French, and so much of her work did not become visible to the rest of the world. This is something that we discussed in the early chapters as a challenge, as a unique challenge, that people who don't publish in English will somehow feel the heat, will feel some difficulty, will feel some challenges. And even when she started publishing in English, her simple and direct responses to reviewer comments, for example, would be viewed as aggressive responses. Now this makes sense, because if you are speaking a language as a first language, then if you have to say something, you also know how to sugarcoat it, how to say it in a rather non-direct and a softer manner. But if you are speaking the same language as a second language, you are rather direct and terse and blunt sometimes, that may be viewed by others as aggressive. This was a unique challenge faced by Denise Fassard. Not just her, all the people speaking another language, a language other than English, face this challenge. So English is the language of science, and there is a need to be more inclusive about people who write research in other languages. One of her earliest work in this field was studying electrical activity of electric fish, and Denise Fassard also performed what is perhaps the first microelectrode recordings from the cerebral cortex of the cat. This she published in French, and these recordings were on pyramidal neurons that respond to somatosensory stimulation in cat. Remember, these findings were published in French, so they were not really received throughout. It did not get the attention that it would have got if it was published in English. That's one challenge. The other challenge was that, being the first study, there were a lot of concerns raised by many people, saying that this work contained, or this measurements or recordings contained artifacts. Although this concern was defended by Jung, one of her colleagues who was also working in this field, but she herself did not follow up on this work and go on to convince her critics, or the critics of her work, that the artifacts were now removed, or there were confirmed results. It is important to keep following up on your work and keep improving your work as a scientist, something that we can learn from the life and works of other scientists. With this, we come to the end of this video. In this video, we looked at intracellular recordings from the brain, specifically the work of Richard Jung in Germany and Denise Fassard in France. Thank you for your attention.